is my Premier, Danielle Smith,
Oh,
reiterating.
no.
It's you. Reiterating what she said when she won the election just a few short weeks ago, that she was committed to fighting with the feds on the issue of natural resources. So let's go to my Premier, Danielle Smith, while Tamara gets her internet connection sorted out.
I'll tell you what's different this time. I mean, in the past, whether it was with Pierre Trudeau or any of a successive number of federal politicians, the fight was always how much additional wealth can be extracted from Alberta to benefit Ottawa. That was always what the fight was before. We've never faced a government that wants to shut our economy down and wants to shut down our energy industry and wants to phase out our oil and natural gas workers to their own detriment. That's what makes this different, is that the aspirations, the ideological aspirations that have been put on the table with targets pulled out of the air by politicians who know nothing about our local environment and how unachievable it is. It's my job to make sure that they understand that it is unachievable, that it does not only harm us, it harms them. As I mentioned to the Prime Minister when I spoke with him, I said, when we do well, we actually generate a heck of a lot of federal revenue in corporate income taxes and personal income taxes. The federal government has its own issues in trying to get to a balanced budget. There is no margin for them in shutting down our economy or shutting down our industry or chasing away investment. And so I'm pretty direct and clear on that. I've had that direct conversation with the Prime Minister several times. I'm going to have that direct conversation with Ministers LeBlanc and Wilkinson today. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to find the areas that we can work together, because there's such an appetite on the part of our industry to be investing in the kind of technologies that they want to see that will reduce emissions. There should be the ability to have a kumbaya moment. I think that was just your term. But the fact of the matter is there's a hard line. We're just not shutting down our oil and natural gas industry. We're not phasing out our oil and natural gas workers. So, I've drawn the line in the sand. I put forward our emissions reduction and energy development plan for a reason, because I'm sending the message to Ottawa that we are going to chart our own pathway to meet our national commitment of being carbon neutral by 2050, and they've got to come into alignment with us. And I think the fact that Minister Wilkinson and Minister LeBlanc are flying out today to meet me is a good sign. I think that they're taking it seriously. And we'll see if we can come up with a working group about how we're going to achieve that. I'm very cautious, though, too, because I remember, along with everybody else, when the tinkling of the champagne glasses, thinking that when Peter Lougheed thought he'd had a deal with Pierre Trudeau, and it turned out to be something very, very different than he thought he was agreeing to. And then he spent the rest of his time fighting to make sure that we got our resources back. So I'm not going to be naive about it either. We're going to be industry-led on this. We're going to make sure that we're always in alignment with what industry says is achievable, what industry is investing in. And it is our job to be an advocate for ourselves and industry about how we're going to reach that target in a way that draws investment in rather than pushes it away.
I love her for that. I really do, because she did it in the nicest possible way, saying, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. We're just not. And this comes on the heels of Justin Trudeau's announcement of his just transition plan to just transition Albertans into unemployment and obscurity, and transition the rest of the country into extreme debt and economic carnage, because that's what happens to the rest of the country if Alberta doesn't do well. But Danielle Smith basically said, look, we're not doing what you want us to do, and that's the end of it. We're going to do what we do. We're going to give you ideas. If you don't want them, that's great, but we're going to do our own thing. And that makes me very, very happy. Makes me kind of sad for the separatist movement, because I think what she's doing is cannibalizing it and making them sort of irrelevant, because she's doing all the things that the separatist sentiment and the separatist movement here in Alberta wanted to address. Like, who's going to fight with the feds on issues of our economy and provincial jurisdiction? Well, it sounds like Danielle Smith is. So I can't wait to see what she does next.
Same. And I wonder too if Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe will kind of join forces with her, and maybe they have like a sort of an unofficial coalition where they will push back on some of these radically progressive policies that, as you mentioned, will cannibalize our economy and continue to do so. It's actually kind of hard to remember what it was like in the pre-Trudeau times prior to 8 years ago, when our economy was doing well. We had strong oil and gas sectors and just the complete decimation of that industry ever since he took reign, that is just proliferating now that he, I guess, is in a way sitting on his high horse now with 8 years under his belt, thinking, I'm untouchable and I can continue to do whatever it is that is on my agenda, and do so unabated, because we've seen premiers, and namely here in Ontario, Premier Doug Ford just pats him on the back and follows the status quo without ever raising any sort of contrarian viewpoint or trying to push back. So it's really refreshing to see a premier doing that, and especially coming from an empowered woman. I really love to see that.
Yeah, me too. You think the left would, but but they sure hate her. And getting back to your point about Scott Moe, I got to give Saskatchewan credit. They actually have been leading the way on this issue, and Alberta is kind of catching up. They had their version of the Sovereignty Act before we did. They have an associate minister. What I could sort of call him the associate minister of fighting with Ottawa, but it's the associate minister of, I forget what it's called, like provincial jurisdiction or provincial autonomy. They have an associate minister committed to doing that. And I think for about the last 2 years. So we're catching up, as Albertans were a little bit louder and a little bit more rednecky about it. While Saskatchewan is sort of the quiet sort of doers on this issue. So there is, of course, a strong coalition between Premier Smith and Scott Moe in Saskatchewan. But, moreover to Danielle Smith saying, we're going to lead the way on the technology here. What she's trying to do is prevent that intellectual and technological flight that we saw in Alberta in the dark times of Pierre Elliott Trudeau and the National Energy Program. What we saw was some of our best and brightest oil companies, engineers, smart people just pack up shop and leave. These things that should have been born in Alberta, these technological advances, they fled to jurisdictions that weren't attacking them and weren't bleeding them dry. And, we have seen some of that. We've seen during Rachel Notley's tenure here in Alberta, just companies fleeing Alberta. Now, they're not going out of the oil and gas business. They're going to Texas. They're going to Iraq. They're going to safer jurisdictions like Kazakhstan, where you pay the local warlord. And that's easier to do business there than to do business in Justin Trudeau's Canada. So oil and gas isn't going away. The technological advancements aren't going away. They're just being born in other places. And Danielle Smith is trying to repatriate those things.
Which is a really sad time for Canada, being that we have such a breadth of natural resources at our disposal. We could be energy independent. And yet here we are trying to kibosh all of that and go toward this idea of a green reset and green infrastructure, which isn't all that green if you look at the way that the actual necessity of mining and the recyclability of these materials. I mean, recycling in and of itself is questionable initiative at best, but
it's a scam,
for lack of a better word. But these batteries, in 20, 25 years, if they don't explode before that time, they're null and void. They're going to be sitting in a landfill, leaching lithium back into the environment. So I don't know how that is seen as being sustainable.
Hey, folks, that was a clip from the Daily Roundup. That is our live stream show that airs from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Monday to Friday. I'm usually here for 4 of the shows. Our Alberta team takes over on Fridays. And you know what? You can interact with the hosts. If you give us a small financial donation, we'll read your comment during the live stream. So please go to revelnews.com/livestream and tune in Monday to Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern.